Textbooks have always tried to brainwash you into believing that human history is a straight, neat, and tidy line. Sorry, but that is a blatant lie. Because in reality, the past is a crazy mess filled with things that shouldn't be allowed to exist. Tonight, we will expose the time-traveling evidence that is smirking in the faces of archaeologists. A wooden god that outlived the pyramids thanks to a chemical accident in Russia, or a Roman head that wandered all the way to Mexico 1,000 years before Columbus even woke up to yawn. From 5,000 Roman soldiers evaporating into the mist without a trace, to dark abyssal eyes from a mega city that incinerated itself. All of them are direct slaps to the face of the perfect chronology you still believe in, hook, line, and sinker. Put your books away, turn off the lights, and prepare for your worldview to collapse. Welcome back to Dark History. Look at your hand. Soft, warm, and full of life, right? But let me tell you a ruthless truth of the universe. You, me, and everything currently breathing on this planet are essentially just a buffet waiting to be served. In the natural world, biology operates under a dictatorial and brutal rule. Everything must die, and more importantly, everything must disappear. When a tree falls in an old-growth forest, it doesn't lie there to rest. No, that is the dinner bell. Fungi, bacteria, insects, Earth's cleaning crew will rush in to tear it apart. They dismantle every fiber of cellulose, break every lignin bond, and grind the tree's existence into dust. A giant oak tree takes a few decades to vanish in a temperate zone, but in a tropical rainforest, it evaporates in just a few years. That is the circle of life. Efficient, relentless, and without exception. Or at least, that's what we thought. Because on this Earth, there exist chemical black holes, where time is frozen and death is denied its power. Nah. Let's turn the clock back to the late 19th century. The year 1890. The industrial world is hungry. In the Ural Mountains, about 100 kilometers from Yekaterinburg, a group of men are toiling away, digging in the bone-chilling cold. They aren't elegant archaeologists with tiny brushes in hand. They are rough miners with calloused hands, and in their eyes, there is only one thing: gold. This area is called the Shigir Peat Bog. Imagine a massive open-air swamp, damp and foul-smelling. The workers are slicing through dense layers of peat, essentially partially decayed plant matter, to find the gold-bearing gravel layer beneath. But they don't know that they are standing atop a bizarre laboratory of Mother Nature. Peat bogs are neither water nor land. They are the domain of sphagnum moss. As this moss grows, it turns the water acidic. And because the water here is stagnant, it severely lacks oxygen, a perfect anaerobic environment. The result? A giant pickle jar. Bacteria and fungi, the greedy wood eaters, cannot survive in this suffocating acidic soup. Anything that falls in here does not decompose. It gets mummified. January 24th, 1890. A depth of 4 meters underground. The gold diggers' shovels stop short. They hit something hard. Not rock, not gold. They haul up large fragments, heavy, black as night, and waterlogged. To the untrained eye, it looks like rotten driftwood. But when the layer of peat mud was wiped away, the miners likely shuddered. It wasn't natural wood. Someone, or something, had worked on it. A giant larch tree had been split, polished, and more horrifyingly, a face was staring back at them from the past. This object, which we now call the Shigir Idol, was carted back to a museum in Yekaterinburg. And do you know what happened next? Absolutely nothing. For over a century, it sat there like a quirky decoration. People glanced at it and shrugged. Probably stuff from some local tribes a few hundred years ago. Modern human arrogance is a potent anesthetic. We always assume our ancestors were ignorant, clumsy fools. But the truth always knows how to slap us in the face. It just waits for the right time. The year 1997. Technology finally caught up with curiosity. Scientists decided to radiocarbon date the Shigir Idol. The principle is simple. When you are alive, you absorb carbon-14. When you die, you stop absorbing it, and carbon-14 begins to decay. Measure the remaining amount, and you know when the tree died. The results returned from the lab made the scientists think the machine was broken. The number was 9,500 years. The archaeological community scoffed. Impossible, they said. Nonsense. Why did they react like that? Because according to history textbooks of that time, 9,500 years ago, humans were just starving hunter-gatherers, running from wild beasts and worrying about dinner day to day. They had no time, no skill, and no reason to carve a monumental wooden statue 5 meters tall, the height of a 2-story building. The skepticism was so great that people accused the museum of making a mistake, or claimed the scientists sampled wood from the core of the tree, the older part, skewing the results. And so, the Shigir Idol was thrown back into the shadows of doubt for another 20 years. It wasn't until 2018. A team of German and Russian experts decided to go big. They used accelerator mass spectrometry, AMS, a beast in the dating world that counts individual atoms instead of just measuring radiation. They took samples from the outermost layer of the tree, the wood that was living at the exact moment it was cut down. The result this time wasn't just a slap. It was a haymaker punch to the timeline of human history. The Shigir Idol is not 9,500 years old. It is approximately 12,100 years old. Stop for a moment to let your brain absorb this shock. When the Shigir Idol was carved, the Great Pyramid of Giza wasn't even an idea in the minds of the Egyptians. It is twice as old as the pyramids. Stonehenge in England, it would be another 6,000 years before stones were stacked. Woolly mammoths were still wandering the Siberian continent. Writing did not exist. The wheel had not been invented. Agriculture hadn't even started in this region. In fact, to the ancient Egyptians who built the pyramids, the Shigir Idol was already an ancient relic. Its existence is a statistical miracle, an error of the universe. We find stone axes because stone doesn't rot. We find bones because bones are hard. But wood? Wood is ephemeral. 99.9% of everything our ancestors created from wood has vanished into the void. The Shigir Idol is the sole survivor, a ghost from a lost world. If that tree had fallen 10 meters to the left or right, outside the perfect chemical zone of the peat bog, today we would have nothing to talk about. It would just be dirt. But it didn't dissolve. It was there, waiting 12 millennia to tell us a story we never expected. And that story begins with its very body, an engineering masterpiece that primitive people were not supposed to be able to make. But they did. We usually picture prehistoric humans as bumbling fools, banging rocks together and hoping fire appears. But the Shigir Idol stands there, laughing at our prejudices. Look at the material. Do you think they just picked up a random dry branch lying by the road? No, they were natural-born materials engineers. The statue was carved from the trunk of a larch tree. Why larch? Because its wood is as hard as steel and full of resin, a natural preservative. These craftsmen knew exactly which wood would outlast their own bones. Scientists counted the tree rings and learned that this tree was 159 years old when the first axe blade touched its bark. That means the seed that birthed it sprouted around 12,300 years ago. They chose a godfather of the forest, felled it with stone tools, remember, no chainsaws yet, and crafted it while the wood was still fresh. It was a job requiring muscle, sweat, and a deep understanding of physics. But here is the tragedy of modern history. When Professor Dmitry Lobanov first assembled the fragments in 1914, the statue stood 5.3 meters tall, a true monster. But then the 20th century arrived with its madness, the Russian Revolution, World War II. In that whirlwind of chaos, humanity did what humanity does best: destroy things and lose stuff. About 2 meters of the lower part of the statue vanished without a trace. Maybe it was smashed, burned for warmth, or simply tossed into a corner of some moldy warehouse. Today, Zorro, that's me, and you only get to see the upper 3.4 meters. But thanks to old drawings, we know its original scale. And that height changes everything. History textbooks still drone on, teaching. Want to build big structures? You need agriculture. You need settlements. You need a surplus of rice to feed idle artists. The logic is, a starving hunter isn't going to waste calories carving a statue. The Shigir Idol says dead wrong. The people who created this statue lived in the Mesolithic era, Middle Stone Age. 12,000 years ago, the world was going through a fever. The Ice Age ended. Glaciers retreated. Sea levels rose. Familiar giant beasts like mammoths were dying out, giving way to elk and bears. In a world full of volatility, chaos, and climate change, these hunter-gatherers were not living miserably. On the contrary, they had incredibly tight social organization, amazing stability, and a culture strong enough to drive them to create a massive religious icon. They weren't just running from the cold. They were asserting sovereignty over nature. And look at their toolbox. This is where things get interesting in a horror movie kind of way. Under the microscope, the cut marks on the wood show up clearly. Archaeologists, playing CSI detectives, identified the murder weapon. They used polished stone axes to fell and plane it. But to carve those deep grooves, those exquisite geometric lines, they used teeth, specifically the lower jaw of a beaver, with sharp incisors still firmly attached to the bone. Imagine that scene. A man holding the jaw of a dead beaver, using its own teeth to carve into the wood. It is brutal resourcefulness. They used nature to sculpt nature, a macabre but genius form of recycling. This discovery forces us to confront a concept I call survivorship bias. We call their era the Stone Age, only because stone is the only thing left remaining. We look at crude stone arrowheads and think, wow, they lived simply. But the Shigir Idol is proof that we are terribly mistaken. It is very likely that the world 12,000 years ago was not just cold caves. It could have been filled with monumental wooden statues, colorful totem poles, magnificent wooden cities. But it all rotted, turned into humus beneath our feet. We don't see them because they weren't lucky enough to fall into a perfect anaerobic peat bog. The Shigir Idol is not a freak or a rare exception. It could very well be the standard. It is the sole lucky survivor of a brilliant but perishable civilization, a wood age that we have forgotten. It stands there like a ghost, bridging the animalistic survival of the Ice Age with the spiritual complexity of modern humans. But age and technique are just the outer shell. The real mystery, the thing that gives you goosebumps, lies right on its surface. The statue is not just a hewn log. It is an encrypted message. It is covered in geometric codes and hidden faces watching you from every angle. And believe me, what they reveal about our ancestors' brains is scarier than those beaver teeth. If you think the Shigir Idol is just a wooden boogeyman carved to scare prehistoric children into finishing their porridge, you are sorely mistaken. Throw that simple primitive man thought away. What we are looking at is not a statue. It is a hard drive storing data, a scripture written in the language of shapes for which we have lost the decryption key. When researchers stopped looking at it with the naked eye and started using 3D scanning technology and microscopic photography, chills ran down their spines. This statue is a narrative structure so complex it's insane. First, look at the main face at the top. An oval face, mouth gaping in an O shape. Is it screaming, singing, or taking its last breath? Those eyes seem to look through the museum glass, staring straight into your soul with a cold clarity. But that is just the gatekeeper. When lasers scan down the body, which looks like a harmless flat plank, a secret that had slept for over a century suddenly woke up. Hidden amidst the wood grain, blending into the zigzag patterns, are 7 other faces. You heard that right? A total of 8 faces. Some look very human. Others are as abstract as a Picasso nightmare. They are ingenious optical illusions. You have to stand at the right angle, under the right light, for them to reveal themselves from the wood grain. They weren't thrown there randomly. There is an order, a distinct social or spiritual hierarchy. The dominant face is high up, 3 figures on the front, 3 figures on the back. Upper world, sky, middle world, humans/earth. Lower world, underworld/spirits. The Shigir Idol might be humanity's first cosmology map. These stacked figures suggest that ancient people didn't view the world as flat. They viewed the world in layers, where humans are sandwiched between the forces of heaven and earth. But that's not all. Look at the skin of the statue. It is tattooed entirely with geometry, zigzag lines, V-shapes, herringbones, and cross-hatching. For decades, lazy archaeologists delivered a verdict. Probably just drawn for decoration. Wrong. In anthropology, nothing is drawn for fun. A zigzag line could be a snake, water, or danger. A straight line is the horizon, the boundary between life and death. Cross-hatching could be a net, a trap, or a barrier separating worlds. Piece them together. The sequence of these patterns from top to bottom is not wallpaper. It is a storyboard, a 12,000-year-old comic strip telling a creation myth, ancestral origins, or tribal taboos. We are looking at a source code of human culture, but we have forgotten the programming language. And this is where things get truly interesting. Fly thousands of miles south to Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. There, at the same time around 11,000 to 12,000 years ago, humans were also erecting giant T-shaped stone pillars. The art style? Strangely enough, very similar. Both feature an X-ray style, hinting at ribs/bones inside. Both focus on the head. Both are abstract and terrifying. What does this say? It says that right after the Ice Age ended, a new software was installed in the human brain across the Eurasian continent. A simultaneous urge to build massive monuments. We used to arrogantly think art developed linearly, from children's scribbles to complex paintings. The Shigir Idol smashed that model. Abstract art, complex symbolic thinking, the ability to encode the world into objects, it all appeared right from the start, explosive and complete. Our ancestors, those forest walkers wearing animal skins, had the brains of philosophers. They weren't just reacting to their environment, they were conceptualizing it. But why? Why spend so much effort to create an object so beautiful, yet so haunting? The answer might lie in that gaping mouth of the top face. A scream piercing through time, warning us about something, or somewhere we shouldn't tread. Look closely at the mouth of the Shigir Idol one more time. A wide O shape. What do you see? A welcoming smile? I don't. That is a scream, or perhaps the breath of a hungry entity. In the world of shamanism in the harsh Siberian region, spirits are not guardian angels fluttering with white wings like in Disney movies. No, they are brutal natural forces, erratic and extremely dangerous. They need to be appeased, they need to be offered sacrifices, and most importantly, they need to be feared. Imagine the setting back then. A flat forest stretching as far as the eye can see. And in the middle of that void, a wooden pole over 5 meters tall rises up. It is 3 times taller than a grown man. It would be a lighthouse in a sea of trees, visible from miles away. Some archaeologists believe this was a giant territorial sign, a harsh message sent to any stranger daring to encroach. This is our ancestors' land. Cross this line, and you will pay the price. But there is another theory, a bit more down to earth. Imagine small, scattered groups of hunters wandering this vast wilderness. They needed a rendezvous point, a place to gather once a year. The Shigir Idol could have been the center of a Stone Age social network. Here, at the feet of the wooden god, they traded goods, performed rituals, and looked for mates. Basically, it was Tinder and the Mall of the Ice Age rolled into one. The stacking of faces eerily reminds us of the totem poles of the Pacific Northwest indigenous people, even though these two cultures are half a world and thousands of years of history apart. This says that carving human faces onto trees and standing them upright is a primal instinct programmed deep in human DNA. When we live in the forest, we want the trees to look back at us. But to do this, you need something more important than faith. That is food. History books often teach us that life before agriculture was nasty, brutish, and short, that humans were always on the brink of starvation. The Shigir Idol laughs in the face of that hypothesis. To fell an ancient tree, process it, carve it meticulously down to the millimeter with stone tools, you need a massive luxury, free time. Starving people don't make art. They look for food. The truth is, the forests of the early Holocene were a giant free supermarket. The climate warmed, plants exploded, wild game ran rampant. These hunters were billionaires in resources. That abundance allowed them to nurture a complex spiritual life and create masterpieces. They were not alone. The zigzag motifs on the Shigir Idol are also found on bone fragments and tools as far away as the Baltic and Northern Europe. Think about that. A shared symbol stretching thousands of kilometers. That is the internet of prehistory, an invisible network connecting ideas, beliefs, and art across the Eurasian continent. So, the final question. Why did such a great god end its life in a foul-smelling swamp? Analysis of weathering marks on the wood reveals a heartbreaking detail. The statue stood tall and proud for about 20 to 50 years. The top part was eroded by rain and wind, while the bottom remained intact. It stood there for a full human lifetime. Children grew up under its shadow, hearing grandparents tell stories about the 7 mysterious faces. And then, when those children became old people, the statue fell. Did it fall due to a storm, or was it a deliberate act? Many ancient cultures considered bogs to be sacred gateways to the underworld, neither land nor water. People threw swords, jewelry, and even human bodies into bogs as sacrifices. Maybe the time of the Shigir Idol was over. The old gods needed to retire. Or perhaps they submerged it in water to protect it from a hostile force, or to send it back to the ancestors. Whatever the reason, the act of dropping it into that chemical pickle jar inadvertently gifted us this priceless treasure. Leaving the cold, icy tombs of Russia, I want to invite you to take a leap in time, thousands of years forward, thousands of miles to the south. Welcome to the flesh-scorching heat of the Jordanian desert. Look down at your feet. We are standing on the banks of the Zarqa River, near modern-day Ammon, the year 7250 BC. This is the pre-pottery Neolithic PPNB era, a dry name for a bloody and glorious time where humanity made a decision from which there was no return. We stopped running. We stopped wandering. We put down roots, domesticated plants, imprisoned animals, and in the process, we domesticated ourselves into cages of our own making. But the residents of Ain Ghazal weren't just planting rice or herding goats. Oh no, they were playing with things much more dangerous. They weren't doing agriculture, they were performing industrial chemical engineering. Fast forward to 1983, a great year for pop music and bulldozers. The Jordanian government was slicing through the desert to build a new highway. Metal machines roared, sharp blades tearing apart the dry earth, and then, clunk. They stopped. Not out of conscience, but because the blade hauled up things that looked like human limbs. A massacre? A modern mafia mass grave? Or a forgotten war crime? Archaeologists immediately arrived, cordoned off the scene, and shoved the civil engineers aside. And what they found, in my opinion, is scarier than a pit of flesh and bone. It was a cache, a morgue of dolls. But don't be mistaken, these aren't tiny clay figurines you buy at a souvenir shop. These are standing figures, nearly life-sized, pale white skin, and eyes. Those eyes staring at the archaeologists with a maniacal, haunting intensity, piercing through 9,000 years of dust. Let me tell you why this thing is insane. Their material, lime plaster. You think lime is mud? You think you just scoop it from the river and mold it? You're too naive. Lime plaster is a high-grade composite material, the ancestor of modern concrete. To create that smooth white skin for these gods, the people of Ain Ghazal had to perform a pyrotechnological process I call the hell cycle. Imagine this. First, you have to mine limestone, calcium carbonate. You crush it. And here is the most horrible part. You have to fire it. Not baking a cake. You need temperatures between 800 to 900 degrees Celsius, about 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit. Remember, this is 7000 BC. No coal, no oil, no gas. Where do you get the energy to maintain a giant kiln at nearly 1,000 degrees Celsius for days on end? The answer is simple and brutal. Forests. The people of Ain Ghazal burned everything. They cut down trees, bushes, anything combustible on the surrounding hills to throw into these giant kilns. The chemical reaction turns limestone into quicklime, calcium oxide, a highly caustic substance that can eat through flesh. Then they add water. Hiss. A violent exothermic reaction occurs, water boiling furiously, turning quicklime into pliable slaked lime. Only then could they shape it, and as it dried, it absorbed carbon dioxide from the air and turned back into stone. Do you see the irony here? To create guardian gods, they committed the first human-caused ecological disaster in history. They were obsessed with this technology. They used it to plaster floors shiny and clean, and used it to create statues. Environmental archaeologists believe this aesthetic and spiritual desire killed the land. They burned forests faster than trees could grow back. They destroyed the very ecosystem feeding their agriculture, just to have better building materials. Sound familiar? Humans, 9,000 years ago or now, have always been good at digging their own graves for short-term goals. Look closer at these engineering marvels. They were built like skyscrapers. Inside the layer of stark white plaster is an armature. Artisans took bundles of reeds and rope, tied them tight to make a skeleton, then plastered over them. This is exactly the principle of reinforced concrete today. Organic reinforcement handles tension, plaster handles compression. But the thing that gives me the biggest shivers is the eyes. The whites are made of pure chalk, but the pupils, those deep, abyssal black pupils, are made of bitumen. Bitumen is natural asphalt, a thick hydrocarbon black as tar. And guess what? Ain Ghazal has no bitumen. This toxic black sludge had to be imported, most likely from the deadly shores of the Dead Sea. This means a trade network existed. Someone waded into that noxious coast, harvested the black goo, transported it across the burning desert, just so these artists could give their god sight. They were made up too. We found traces of red ochre, iron oxide. Originally, these statues weren't deathly white. They were vibrant, lively, colorful, contrasting sharply with the dusty brown of the mud brick houses around them. Why did they do that? Why expend such terrible energy? Look at the social context. Ain Ghazal wasn't a village. It was a megasite. While other villages had only 100 to 200 people, this place crammed in over 2,500 human beings. This was a metropolis of the ancient world. For the first time in history, humans had to live so crowded together. Disease, waste, noise, and the extreme stress of living right next to strangers. Imagine that tension. A social pressure cooker, ready to explode at any moment. Anthropologists believe lime plaster technology and these statues were the social glue. To make a statue, the whole community had to work. Woodcutters, stone miners, kiln watchers, bitumen transporters. It forced everyone to cooperate. And the final product, those towering figures, were symbols of forced unity. But wait, there is a fatal detail you need to know. Chemical analysis shows that the plaster for the statues and the plaster for the floors is identical. There is no divine formula. They used the same material they trampled on every day to create gods. What does this mean? The house wasn't just a dwelling. The house was a sanctuary. Shiny white floors were a sign of status in a muddy world. And those statues, they didn't belong to a public temple. They belonged to the family. They were part of the house structure. But like every civilization based on exhaustion extraction, the trap snapped shut. As forests vanished, plaster quality began to decline. Later, plaster layers got thinner, softer. They ran out of fuel. They started using marl, a cheap muddy clay instead of high-quality fired plaster. The statues of Ain Ghazal, ironically, are a snapshot of a civilization at peak energy consumption, right before it collapsed completely. But the story doesn't stop there. What happened to the statues after they were created is the truly bizarre part. They weren't displayed forever. They didn't stand there for descendants to admire. Their fate was decided by a ritual that our modern minds find hard to swallow. What did they do with these expensive gods? The answer lies deep underground, and it is much darker than you imagine. Welcome back to the excavation pit. We've talked about how the people of Ain Ghazal cooked rocks and burned forests to create flesh and skin for their gods. Now let's look closely at what they actually created. Because if you think the Statue of Liberty or the Statue of David is the standard for sculpture, you need to recalibrate your aesthetic eye to the standards of 7000 BC. At Ain Ghazal, archaeologists found two main types of monsters: full-body statues and busts. The full-body type is about 1 meter tall, but their body proportions are, well, to put it mildly, Bizarre. Short, thick legs, bodies as flat as if they were run over by a truck. And most importantly, they cannot stand on their own. Their feet are too small and round, like poorly designed dolls. What does this say? They weren't born to stand independently in a town square. They were designed to be anchored into the ground, or leaned against a wall, imprisoned in the dark recesses of the house. They needed support. But the second type is the one that will make you lose sleep tonight. The two-headed bust. Look at the screen. A broad muscular torso, but sprouting from it are two separate heads. Two faces staring in the same direction. This is where engineering clashes loudly with mysticism. Why two heads? Long-bearded, gray-haired scholars have argued heatedly about this. Are they twins? Are they husband and wife? Or is it an abstract philosophical concept of duality? Life and death? Male and female? Or, more horrifying, a collective soul? Look at the internal structure of this two-headed statue. They have two heads, but inside the reed armature they share one spine. Two minds, one heart. This could be a political statement. We are two tribes, but we share one living body. Or simply, it's the nightmare of a sculptor after inhaling too much smoke from the lime kiln. And don't think they were just soulless white lumps of lime. Neolithic fashion was more stylish than you think. Pigment traces show they were once elaborately painted. Some guys wore loincloths. Others had drawings on their chests, perhaps tattoos or jewelry. Red ochre, iron oxide, was used for embellishment, turning these white ghosts into vibrant, living entities, standing shimmering under the flickering torchlight in cramped houses. But my skeptical friends, this is where Zorro exposes the ruthless truth of time. These statues carried within them a curse of destruction. Remember the reed armature inside? That is organic material. And the law of nature is, what lives must die, what is organic must rot. The outer lime shell is as hard as stone, but the inner core is fragile. After a few decades, or perhaps a generation, the reeds inside would rot, turning to dust. And that is exactly the state we find them in today, hollow shells. The soul inside vanished long ago. This implies an interesting truth. These statues had an expiration date. They weren't built to last forever like the pyramids. They were created for a specific purpose, for a specific period of time, a festival, a human lifetime, or the short reign of a chieftain. And when the inner core began to rot, when the god's spine turned to dust, the people of Ain Ghazal faced a tough question. What do you do with a god that has passed its expiration date? You can't throw them in the trash. You can't crush them to pave roads. Because in the ancient mindset, the statue is not just an image. The statue is the entity. This is called sympathetic magic, or symbolic realism. This statue is your ancestor. If you throw the ancestor statue in the dump, the ancestor will come back and strangle you. Figuratively, or literally if you are superstitious enough. So, they did something both respectful and creepy. They held funerals for the statues. Imagine this scene, a family digging a hole right in the middle of their living room. They carefully lower these 1 meter tall statues into the ground. They lay them out in a row, neatly, facing east or west. Not dumped messily like scrap, but with the arrangement of a burial ritual. In some cases, archaeologists found statues that were smashed before burial, but not smashed to smithereens out of anger. These were calculated cracks, a deactivation, a ritual to release the soul from the lime shell before letting it rest. Why bury them under the floor? Why would you want to walk, eat, sleep, and live right on top of your ancestors' heads? The answer lies in 2 words: power. In a cramped mega-city like Ain Ghazal, where 2,500 people fought for every meter of land, lineage was everything. Burying your ancestors right beneath your feet is how you claim sovereignty. This is my house. My grandfather is lying right under that floor. You want to take my land? Step over my grandfather's dead body first. The dead became the foundation, literally, of the household. The living stood on the shoulders of the dead to survive. Those bitumen eyes remained wide open in the darkness underground, staring into the void, protecting the rights of the descendants above. But burying statues isn't even the weirdest part. If you think sleeping on top of two-headed statues is scary, wait until I tell you what they did with actual flesh and blood heads. At Ain Ghazal, the line between the living, monuments, and corpses was not as clear as we think. There was another custom, darker, bloodier, involving beheading and applying makeup to skulls, which will make those lime statues look like children's toys. Take a deep breath, because we are about to enter the room of the watching skulls. If you thought burying doll-like statues under the floor was the peak of weirdness, hold on to your seat. We are going deeper into the twisted mind of the Ain Ghazal people. Dig a little deeper next to those statues. What do you find? Human bones, real skeletons. But there is a small detail that sends chills down archaeologists' spines. The heads are missing. Their necks were cleanly cut. Headless bodies lay curled up under the floor where their descendants were eating dinner above. So where did the heads go? We find them in other pits, stored separately like secret treasures. And this is where the horror movie begins. The people of Ain Ghazal didn't just keep dry skulls. They reconstructed faces for the dead. They took the skull of a father, mother, or grandparent, then plastered over it with lime mortar, the same material used for statues and floors, remodeling the nose, cheeks, and chin. And the eyes? They stuffed cowrie shells into the empty sockets. Look at that photo. A real skull, wrapped in a layer of eternal artificial skin, with white shell eyes staring blankly into nothingness. This is called the skull cult. Why did they do that? Because for them, the face is the residence of identity. Bones are just a frame, but the face is the soul. And those giant statues we discussed in the previous two parts, basically they are super ancestors. They are enlarged, artificialized versions of these plastered skulls. If a plastered skull represents a specific individual, this is Great Grandpa 7, then the two-headed statue might represent the connection of an entire lineage or a mythical founding deity. But let's stop for a moment to reflect on the psychological implications of this. Imagine you live in a house about 20 square meters wide, cramped, hot, and in the corner of the room or beneath your feet, the wide eyes of ancestors are staring, day and night. Privacy? Non-existent? Personal secrets? Forget it. This is a genius and terrifying mechanism of social control, a big brother version of the Neolithic era. In a city of 2,500 people rife with disease, disputes, and stress, how do you keep order without police or surveillance cameras? Simple. You create watchers. You behave properly, don't steal, share food. Not because you fear the law, but because Grandpa is watching. Those eyes made of pitch-black bitumen never blink. It is 24/7 spiritual surveillance. The invisible pressure from these statues and skulls kept society from being torn apart by chaos. Now, let's go back to the mystery of the two-headed statues. Why the need for two heads on one body? A compelling political theory suggests Ain Ghazal was a melting pot. As the desert grew drier, nomadic hunter-gatherer groups were forced to migrate into agricultural villages to survive. farmers and hunters. Two lifestyles, two completely different mindsets crammed into one place. Conflict was inevitable. The two-headed statue could be propaganda. Look, we are different, but we share one body. We have one heart, one spine. Killing each other means suicide. It is a symbol of painful but necessary political unification. However, there is another darker theory explaining why these statues were eventually buried so carefully. That is the scapegoat theory. Remember the population explosion, disease, and environmental degradation. Life at Ain Ghazal was not paradise. It was full of death and fear. Perhaps these statues were not gods to be worshipped in the way we understand. Maybe they were spiritual waste containers. The community poured all their anxiety, guilt, filth, and trauma into these effigies. "Oh, statue, take my child's sickness, take our sins." And when the statue was full, when it had absorbed too much negative energy, it became a dangerous object, like radioactive spiritual waste. You couldn't keep it in the house anymore. You had to dispose of it. That is why they buried them. They didn't bury them because they died. They buried them to seal them away. They sealed them under thick layers of earth, ritually cracked them to disconnect them, confining that toxic energy underground forever. Ironically, this very act of burial to discard or seal is what saved them. If they had been left in a temple, wind and rain would have eroded the plaster, insects would have eaten the reed core, and later invaders would have smashed them to dust. The earth is history's safest museum. The people of Ain Ghazal unwittingly sent a time capsule to the future, containing their fears and beliefs. But this capsule marked the end, not the beginning. Because right after these statues were buried, their civilization began to slide into the abyss. What killed the creators of these black-eyed gods? And what is the final lesson they left for us before disappearing into the desert sands? Every party must come to an end, and at Ain Ghazal the party ended not with music fading out, but with the deadly silence of the desert swallowing the ruins. We saw them cooking rocks, burning forests, building shiny houses, and creating powerful two-headed gods. But there is a grim law of the universe that the people of Ain Ghazal learned the hard way. There is no such thing as a free lunch. Their industrial lime revolution failed, a total and catastrophic failure. Look at the latest archaeological layers of the site. They tell a sad story. The plaster layers became paper-thin, crumbly. They no longer had wood to fire kilns to 900 degrees Celsius. The forests were gone. The once green hills surrounding the valley were now bare gravel and rock. Environmental archaeologists call this a local ecological disaster. The people of Ain Ghazal committed the classic mistake that humanity is still repeating today. They sawed off the branch they were sitting on. The obsession with lime technology, the desire to build clean houses and divine statues, consumed their only energy source. When the trees vanished, the soil eroded. Agriculture collapsed. Added to the increasingly arid climate of the Levant at that time, this mega city of 2,500 became a death trap. And what did they do? They gave up. They didn't invent solar power. They didn't find a new fuel source. They disbanded. The complex social structure collapsed. The people of Ain Ghazal scattered, abandoning the plastered houses that were once their pride. They reverted to a small-scale nomadic pastoral lifestyle, wandering with herds of goats across the dry lands. They turned back the clock of social evolution. And here is the detail that makes me ponder the most. The art of making monumental plaster statues was lost. It simply disappeared. Poof. Like snuffing out a candle. Humanity would not create freestanding human statues of this size again for the next 3,000 years. Let that number sink in. 3,000 years. That is a period longer than the time from Julius Caesar to the era of you and me combined. We had to wait for the rise of the giant civilizations in Mesopotamia and Egypt for humanity to dare dream of creating such massive figures once again. What does this tell us? It is a direct slap in the face to the naive notion that history always moves forward, that tomorrow is always more modern than yesterday. Wrong. Human history is not a straight line upwards. It is a frantic heartbeat graph. We advance, we stumble, we forget, and we have to learn again from scratch. The statues of Ain Ghazal represent a false start of civilization. We had the technology, we had the artistry, we had the social organization to do great things 9,000 years ago, but we weren't wise enough to sustain it. We burned all the fuel, buried the gods, and walked into the darkness of oblivion. Today, if you have the chance to visit the Jordan Museum in Amman or the Louvre in Paris, seek them out. Stand in front of these statues. When you look into those eyes made of deep black bitumen, you aren't just looking at a work of art. You are looking at survivors. They are silent witnesses to a failed experiment of humanity. They watched our ancestors try to conquer the earth with fire and chemistry. They witnessed human arrogance in thinking we could exploit nature forever. And they witnessed the earth winning in the final minute. Their creators are dead, their bones turned to dust, their names erased from memory. But the statues, the buried ones, the ones sealed underground, outlasted them all. Their wide-open eyes are like a warning sent through time to us, the ones building skyscrapers and burning this planet at an even more horrific speed. Look at us. We were the pinnacle of an era, and now we are just ghosts in a glass case. That is the story of Ain Ghazal, a story of ambition, of art, and of the inevitable collapse when humans fight against nature. But our journey into dark history does not stop in the Jordanian desert. The next transition requires us to change scale dizzyingly. Leaving the stifling, cramped burial pits under the floorboards, we will fly to a place where the air is so thin it's hard to breathe. Pack your warm clothes. We are going to the majestic Andes Mountains in South America. There, humans didn't hide the faces of gods under the floor. There, they carved faces into the mountains themselves. Or at least, that's what we think. See you at an altitude of 4,000 meters, where the line between rock and divinity is blurred. Welcome to an altitude of 4,000 meters. Take a deep breath. Difficult, right? Here, the air is so thin your lungs scream for oxygen, and your brain starts playing tag with reality. We are standing on the Marcahuasi Plateau, Peru. This place doesn't look like Earth. It looks like a forgotten battlefield of the gods, or maybe an alien movie set that wrapped up millions of years ago. The silence here is absolute, broken only by the wind whistling through the rock crevices, a ghostly sound, like the whispers of trapped souls. Look around. What do you see? Rocks. Thousands of volcanic rocks scattered about. But wait. Squint your eyes under the harsh sun of the Andes. That isn't just rock. That is a giant turtle crawling toward the abyss. That over there is a medieval warrior's helmet. And over there, towering against the blue sky, is the African Queen. And then the star of the show appears, the monument to humanity, also known as Pekagasha. Look at it. A vertical cliff face 25 meters high. From this angle, you see a stern, aged face staring into the void. Step a few paces to the right, the face becomes younger. Step a bit more, it transforms completely. A rock, yet it holds an entire anthropological file. It has a chin, a high nose bridge, a brow ridge furrowed in deep thought. It resembles the Moai statues on Easter Island, or the Egyptian Sphinx more than a random product of nature. And this is where I have to ask the million-dollar question, the question that has torn the research community into two opposing camps. Is this a masterpiece of geology or a legacy of archaeology? Is it Mother Nature getting drunk and sculpting on a whim? Or is it the hand of a lost civilization trying to send us a signal? To avoid being called delusional dreamers, let me throw a bit of hard science in your face. Geologists, the people who always want to crush romance with hammers and magnifying glasses, say, Zorro, wake up. That is just ignimbrite rock. Fine, ignimbrite. That is the corpse of volcanic eruptions. Millions of years ago, this mountain exploded, spewing ash and molten debris. When this mess settled, it was still hot and soft, then slowly cooled and welded back into stone. But the laws of physics are cruel. As it cools, rock contracts and cracks. These cooling joints are the very first brush strokes. Then, add the spice of time. Millions of years of wind erosion, torrential rain, and the brutal freeze-thaw cycle of the highlands. Water seeps into cracks, freezes at night, expands, and shatters the rock from the inside. This process is called differential erosion. Imagine nature as a mad sculptor holding a grinder. The soft rock is blown away, the hard rock remains. In Cappadocia, Turkey, or Bryce Canyon, Utah, this process creates mushroom rocks or spires, but there they are just abstract shapes. But at Marcahuasi, everything is suspiciously specific. That is what makes my neck go cold. Nature loves chaos, but Marcahuasi is overflowing with order. The monument to humanity has a mouth, eye sockets. Not just one rock looking like a human face, but dozens. The density of simulacra, objects looking like other things here, is statistically absurd. The skeptics pull out their trump card, pareidolia. You know this phenomenon, right? It's when your brain, biologically programmed to recognize its own kind, desperately tries to find a face in random data. That's why you see a face on a piece of toast or the man in the moon. Your brain is a liar. It would rather see a fake face than miss an enemy hiding in the bushes. The geologists smirk. Look, if the sun is directly overhead, the shadows disappear, and that face disappears too. It is just an illusion of light and shadow. But permit me to interrupt them with a smirk of my own, because that argument has a gaping hole. If you were an ancient sculptor standing before a massive natural rock block weighing thousands of tons, would you be stupid enough to chisel it from scratch? No. You would play the game of renovation. You find a rock that already looks 80% like the face you want. Then, you just chip away the remaining 20% to make it perfect. This is the technique of animism in the landscape, a mindset extremely common in the Andes. The Incas worshipped stones. They didn't consider stones inanimate, but sleeping gods. Why carve a new statue when the god is already there, just needing to be woken up? And about the light? The camp supporting the ancient sculpture theory considers that a feature, not a bug. They argue that the creators of Marcahuasi were masters of astronomy and optics. These faces weren't designed to be seen all the time. They are giant stone clocks. They only turn on at the winter solstice, summer solstice, or a specific hour of the day. They use the sun as a flashlight and shadows as ink. It is a crazy idea, but also utterly fascinating. It requires a level of understanding of space and time far beyond what we attribute to ancient people. So, who was here? We know for sure this place wasn't desolate. Archaeologists have found bones, tombs, and stone houses. The Huanca people lived here. burying their dead in the very caves at the foot of these monuments. They saw these faces every day. But were they the authors? Or were they just latecomers, looking up at these cliffs with the same awe and fear as we do now? To carve a 25-meter rock, you need scaffolding, thousands of hours of labor, and tools harder than volcanic rock. But absolutely, not a single chisel mark exists. The rock surface is completely weathered, covered in ancient lichen. If it was carved, it was done so long ago that time has wiped away every piece of human evidence, returning it to nature. We are standing before a cold stalemate. On one side is geological probability. Rocks break randomly and our brains invent a story. On the other is statistical anomaly. Too many faces, too many details at a sacred site. But wait, don't jump to conclusions. Because the real story of Marcahuasi doesn't begin with the rocks. It begins with a madman, or perhaps a genius, who spent 9 years living in a cold stone hut on this plateau to decode a terrifying message. And believe me, his hypothesis will make you wish these were just inanimate rocks. If you think hiking up here for a day is exhausting, try imagining living here for 9 years. In the 1950s, when the world down below was busy with the Cold War and rock and roll, a man named Daniel Russo climbed to the top of Marcahuasi and decided not to come down. He wasn't a dry geologist with rulers. He was an explorer, a mystical philosopher, and in the eyes of many at the time, a crackpot. Russo lived in a small, cramped stone hut, wind whistling through the door cracks every night. What did he spend nearly a decade doing? Looking. He observed these rocks under every angle of light, from dawn to dusk, from full moon to crescent moon. He took photos, drew maps, and cataloged the rock formations with a near maniacal obsession. And Russo's conclusion? He tossed the pareidolia hallucination theory straight into the trash. He also shook his head at the idea that local tribes made them. No, Russo said, they weren't on this level. In Russo's worldview, these rocks were too grand, too complex, and too highly symbolic to be the product of prehistoric potato farmers. He believed Marcahuasi was the legacy of a lost global civilization, a name he coined himself. The masma culture. This is where the story shifts from archaeology to sci-fi horror. According to Russo, the masma people weren't primitive. They were an extremely advanced prehistoric civilization, existing before the Great Flood or the last ice age. But they had a terrible secret. They knew the apocalypse was coming. Russo called it the harvest of humanity. Imagine you know that every few thousand years, Earth hits the reset button. Solar storms scorch, magnetic poles flip, or floods drown continents. Everything will be wiped out to start over. What would you do? How would you leave a testament for the next generation, the clueless survivors who will have to start over from the Stone Age? Write on paper. Paper will rot. Carve into wood, wood will burn. Cast in metal, metal will rust or be melted down. Only one thing lasts through time. Stone. Russo argued that the masma people chose Marcahuasi as a stone Noah's Ark. They didn't choose randomly. They sought places with high electromagnetic stability, where the noise of the catastrophe would have the least impact, and the rock here was durable enough to defy eternity. They turned this entire mountain into a library, an encyclopedia encoding their knowledge. Let's go back to our star, the monument to humanity, Peka. In Russo's eyes, it isn't just one face. He claimed to have identified 14 separate faces on that same rock structure. But you can't see them all at once. They only reveal themselves as the sun moves, like a slow-motion movie. And the creepiest part? Those faces represent the different races of humanity. There are features of Caucasians, Africans, Semites, and Asians, all gathered on a cliff in South America, where, according to mainstream history, these races had never met at that time. Rousseau's message was clear. We were all here. We are one, and we were once wiped out. That's not all. Rousseau pointed to another rock block, the Tauri lion. He said, "Look, that is an African lion. And you know, African lions don't go on vacation to Peru. South America has jaguars, pumas, but no maned lions." To Rousseau, this was ironclad proof that the Masma civilization was a global network. They traveled the world and recorded everything they saw in stone. He also found figures of a turtle, symbol of stability, and a frog, symbol of water. He drew lines connecting these rocks, claiming their specific viewing angles were geodetic markers, pointing straight to other sacred sites across the planet, like the Egyptian pyramids or Stonehenge. Of course, mainstream archaeology looked at Rousseau like an escaped mental patient. They called the masma theory pseudo-history, the delusion of a loner who spent too much time on a mountain lacking oxygen. But there is one thing they cannot deny. Rousseau touched a deep fear in our subconscious, the fear of being forgotten, the desire to leave a mark before the darkness falls. And no matter how absurd the Masma civilization theory sounds, modern science, with all its machines and advanced technology, is starting to find strange things in the South American jungle. Things that make us ask ourselves, did that crazy old man in the stone hut know something we don't? Is there a scientific basis for a lost advanced civilization here? Or is it all just a daydream? Fasten your seatbelts, because in the next part, we will turn on the laser scanners and go looking for answers beneath the dense jungle canopy. Rousseau might be a dreamer, but he wasn't entirely wrong about one thing. We are underestimating the past. While traditional archaeologists laugh at the idea of a global masma civilization, modern technology is quietly rewriting history books. Let's talk about LiDAR, the aerial laser scanning technology that helps strip bare the dense vegetation. Recently, these lasers have been scanning the Amazon and the Andes, and guess what they found? Not small, scattered tribes living in thatched huts. We are finding megacities, massive earthen structures, and intricate road networks swallowed by the jungle for thousands of years. It turns out pre-Columbian South America was much more crowded and complex than we ever thought. While this doesn't prove that Rousseau's Masma people flew spaceships or used telepathy, it confirms a truth. Our historical timeline is as full of holes as a block of Swiss cheese. So, let's bring Rousseau's hypothesis down to earth a bit. If Marcahuasi isn't a suicide note sent to the future, then what is it? The answer might be more pragmatic than you think. It could be a survival base. The Andean people weren't dreamers. They were brilliant engineers in a harsh environment. We know the Incas built perfectly interlocking stone walls to withstand earthquakes, something modern reinforced concrete still struggles to bow down to. We know they built food storage towers called kolkas high up to preserve food for years in case of famine. So, the idea of turning an isolated rocky plateau into a ceremonial and survival fortress is entirely logical. And this is where the story gets technically interesting. Water. Marcahuasi isn't just a pile of dry rocks. Look closely at its structure. This plateau acts like a giant sponge. It catches all the rainwater and melting snow, holds it, and then slowly releases water down to the valleys below to feed the inhabitants. Researchers have found ruins of an incredibly complex system of dams and canals right on top of this plateau. The ancients weren't just sightseeing, they were managing the source of life. Back to those bizarre rock statues. If they aren't portraits of gods, then what? What if they are traffic signs? Look at the frog statue. In Andean mythology, frogs are always linked to rain and water. A religious person would say, "Oh, this is an altar to pray for rain." But an ancient hydraulic engineer might say, "No, you fool. That means dig here for water." It is very likely these shapes were placed, or refined, at strategic locations to mark underground water veins or critical aquifers. The turtle, the helmet, the queen, they could be an encrypted geographical map guiding the community to resources when the outside world turned to chaos. Marcahuasi, from this perspective, is not an art museum. It is a machine. A giant ecological machine camouflaged under the guise of religion and mythology. But even if we explain the function of the water and stone, there remains something invisible lurking here. Something LiDAR scanners can't see, but your body can feel. The curanderos, local shamans, don't climb up here to inspect the canals. They come here for energy. They call this place a vortex. Modern science frowns, but geologists nod to confirm an interesting detail. The rock here is not normal. It contains extremely high concentrations of quartz and feldspar. Do you know what quartz is used for? Watches, electronics, transmitters. It has piezoelectric properties. Under the pressure of immense gravity and temperature changes, this mountain is literally broadcasting. That is why many visitors up here report strange phenomena. Headaches, dizziness, the sensation of electric current running through their bodies, or dreams so vivid they are terrifying. Medicine calls it mild altitude sickness. Shamans call it a spiritual portal. So ultimately, what is Marcahuasi? A water fortress? A natural broadcasting station? Or just a place where our imagination gets oxygen deprived and starts to float? In the final part, we will have to deliver a verdict on this mysterious file. And the answer might lie in the very sound howling past your ears right now. Be quiet for a moment. Do you hear that? That isn't just the wind whistling. When the cold air currents of the Andes thread through these bizarre rock towers, cracks, and caves, they create distinct tones. Sometimes like a mournful flute, other times like a deep drum from the belly of the earth. Some researchers believe Marcahuasi was chosen not just for what could be seen, but for what could be heard. It is a natural cathedral, a stone symphony orchestra that the ancients might have used to amplify hypnotic states during rituals. Imagine you are high on natural psychedelics, standing amidst giant faces, and the mountain starts to sing. That is a full HD spiritual experience that no modern VR technology can replicate. So after all the geological, archaeological, and acoustic analysis and Rousseau's crazy theories, what is my final verdict? The truth, as usual, lies in the zigzagging gray area between two extremes. If you forced me to choose, I would say the most convincing scientific explanation is a combination of both. Nature was the initiator, and humans were the finishers. It is very likely the ancients didn't chisel these rocks from scratch. They weren't that idle or stupid. They practiced animism. They saw a rock with a soul, with a suggestive shape, and perhaps, just perhaps, they climbed up there, ground an eye socket a bit deeper, polished a jawline to highlight the spirit of that rock. Over thousands of years, rain, wind, and time have blurred the line between human chisel marks and natural cracks. The result is that we have a giant Rorschach test on a geological scale. You see a face? Good. You see a lifeless lump of rock? Also good. That ambiguity might be the key point. In the worldview of shamanism, the boundary between matter and spirit is fluid. The ancients didn't need a statue perfect down to the pore like Renaissance Michelangelo. To them, perfection is dead. Ambiguity is alive. They didn't carve statues, they just woke up the spirits dozing in the stone. And what about Daniel Rousseau? the man who wasted or dedicated 9 years of his life to these rocks. His legacy is complex. His theory of a global masma civilization might be dead wrong historically. But he was right about something more important: the power of place. Without Rousseau's madness and obsession, Marcahuasi might have been forgotten, turned into a quarry for construction materials, or destroyed by careless tourists. Thanks to him, this place is now a protected area. He forced the modern, arrogant world to bow down and look at the mysteries of the past. When you stand before the monument to humanity, whether you believe it is an alien masterpiece, a lost civilization, or just a prank of erosion, the shiver running down your spine is real. That is the feeling of facing deep time. Those stone faces were here before we were born, and they will still be here staring into the void long after this YouTube channel, the internet, and our entire civilization turn to dust. They are silent witnesses, reminding us of the smallness and transience of human life. But while Marcahuasi deals with the poetic ambiguity of rocks and souls, our next mystery deals with a reality much colder, harder, and more ruthless. We will leave the windy mountains to step into the dark corridors of power, where secrets aren't carved into stone, but buried under tons of classified paperwork and the terrifying silence of military bureaucracy. Welcome back. Wipe the gold dust of the Peruvian tombs we just visited off yourself. Today I'm dragging you into the mud. Yes, you heard that right. The swampy mud, the rotten earth rain, and the bone-chilling cold of northern England. Imagine this. You possess the greatest, most brutal, and most efficient war machine the ancient world has ever seen. A monster of iron and discipline. And then, poof, it evaporates. Not one man, not a platoon, but 5,000 men armed to the teeth, gone, without a trace, without a note. Welcome to the most spine-chilling cold case of the Roman Empire, the disappearance of Legio IX Hispana, the Ninth Legion. To understand the absurdity of this case first, you have to understand what the hell the Roman army was. Don't think they were just a mob holding swords and screaming like in the movie Gladiator. Oh no, the Roman army was a miracle of administrative bureaucracy. They were the first organization in human history to professionalize killing on a continental scale. A Roman legion wasn't a gang, it was a multinational corporation. It had a payroll. It had pension plans for veterans. It had a team of surgeons, civil engineers, and most importantly, people who kept meticulous records to the point of madness. Every soldier had a serial number. Every grain of wheat in the warehouse was counted. If a soldier sneezed at the border, Rome would know and write it in the ledger. That is precisely what makes this incident so disturbing. In a world controlled by paperwork and iron laws like that, losing the Ninth Legion is like the United States today suddenly misplacing the entire city of Detroit. It is impossible. Look at the resume of these guys. The Ninth Legion weren't rookies. They were the Hammer of Rome, founded by Pompey the Great in 65 BC. They had served under Julius Caesar. They earned the title Hispana by bathing in the blood of enemies in Spain. By 43 AD, they were the spearhead in the invasion of Britain under Emperor Claudius. For decades, they were stationed at Eboracum, modern-day York. This was the fortress guarding the wild frontier, where Roman civilization stared into the chaotic darkness of the north. And then, around 120 AD, silence covers everything. Papers stop updating, reports stop being sent. Their designation disappears from the roll calls. We are talking about a legion at full strength, 5,000 heavy infantry, tanks made of meat in ancient times, plus 500 cavalry. And don't forget the massive entourage following them. Cooks, engineers, blacksmiths, prostitutes, slaves, a total of about 6,000 to 7,000 human beings. 7,000 people vanished into the void. So what the hell happened? If you are a fan of Hollywood, you definitely know this script. Movies like The Eagle or Centurion all tell the same bloody story. It is the story that we, those who love drama, want to believe the most. That script is, the Ninth Legion marched north, entering the thick mist of Caledonia, modern-day Scotland. They went to crush the Picts, those blue-tattooed barbarians who fought like demons. And in that mist, they were ambushed, surrounded, slaughtered to the last man. This theory sounds very plausible, right? It explains why Emperor Hadrian suddenly rushed to Britain in 122 AD. He personally ordered the construction of something insane, Hadrian's Wall. Think about it. You don't build a stone wall 73 miles long, towering high, just to decorate your garden. You build it to separate us from them. You build it to stop fear from flooding into your bedroom. Historically, Hadrian's Wall is like a giant strip of crime scene tape. It screams, "Don't go past here. There is something horrific on the other side." If 5,000 Roman soldiers were truly butchered in some misty valley, then this would be the greatest military disaster since the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest a century earlier, where 3 legions were wiped out by the Germans. The Romans were obsessed with Teutoburg. They cried, they wrote poems, they recorded history about that shame for 100 years. But with the Ninth Legion, only silence. Not a single Roman historian, guys who love to gossip, mentioned a disaster in Britain involving the Ninth Legion. Tacitus said nothing. Cassius Dio said nothing. This silence is the biggest clue and also the scariest. Was Rome covering something up? Was this defeat so humiliating, so devastating that the emperor ordered damnatio memoriae, erasing their name from the flow of history? Or did this legion do something worse than dying? A mutiny or mass desertion? We need evidence. We need bodies. And modern archaeology has rolled up its sleeves to go find these ghosts. If they died in Scotland, the ground there must be full of bones, shattered armor, and layers of charcoal. Archaeologists have dug at forts like Burns' work. Did they find anything? Yes. There is evidence of violent conflict. Lead sling bullets scattered, signs of scorched earth. But to point at that pile of bones and say, "Aha! Here's the guy from the Ninth Legion," is a different story. No seals, no rings, nothing specifically identifying. And just when we thought we understood what happened, that they died gloriously or shamefully in Scotland, shocking evidence appeared. Not in England, but in a place no one expected. It lay beneath the soil of the Netherlands, and it smashed every Hollywood theory we ever believed. Forget the romantic mists of Scotland. Forget the bloodthirsty Pict warriors in blockbuster movies. Because the most important evidence regarding the fate of those 5,000 burly men lies not on the battlefield. It lies here, on a lump of baked clay. Archaeologists in Nijmegen, Netherlands, found something that made them rub their eyes 3 times. It was stamps on tiles, and carved on them was the fateful inscription LEG9HISP, Legio Nona Hispana. But here is the slap in the face to old theories. Dating shows these bricks were fired around 121 AD. You see the problem, right? If the Ninth Legion was busy making bricks and building camps in the Netherlands in 121, then they couldn't have been minced in Scotland in 117. Dead people don't make bricks, ladies and gentlemen, unless Rome possessed zombie technology we don't know about. So, the massacre in the North Script is bankrupt. We have to switch to another script, less bloody, but much more corporate, a job transfer. Look at a map of the world in the 2nd century. Rome wasn't just fighting in Britain. This empire was bleeding everywhere, especially in the east. In the early 2nd century, the real meat grinder wasn't in Scotland, but in Judea and the Parthian border. The Bar Kokhba revolt, 132 to 135 AD, wasn't a peaceful protest. It was a barbaric bloodbath requiring Rome to throw in every resource they had. It is very likely the bosses in Rome looked at the map and said, "Hey, pull the 9th out of Britain, send them to the Netherlands to rest a bit, then shove them into the frying pan of the Middle East." And that is where legions went to die. If the 9th Legion was destroyed in Judea or Armenia, Roman historians, those lazy and arrogant folks, wouldn't write a single dedicated line for them. They would just lump those 5,000 bodies into the general casualties category. A statistical death. Nameless. Gloryless. But wait. There is still a foul stench rising from this case. Isotope analysis from skeletons found in York shows us a chaotic picture. These soldiers came from everywhere. Africa, the Danube, the Mediterranean. It shows a unit that was patching itself up, trying to fill its ranks with anyone they could find. But we still haven't found the mass grave of the 9th Legion. Why? Perhaps this unit suffered a fate worse than death, something the Romans feared more. In Roman military law, if a legion fled, was cowardly, or rebelled, the punishment was decimatio, decimation. They would divide the soldiers into groups of 10, draw lots. The unlucky one who drew the black lot would be beaten to death by the other 9 comrades with clubs or stones. You kill your own friends to save your life. After that bloody punishment, the legion would be disbanded. The survivors were stripped of their titles, torn apart, and merged into other units like second-class citizens, and the name 9th Legion would be erased from the books forever. The absence of an official memorial suggests the highest probability. They didn't vanish like heroes. They dissolved like failures. Or simpler, crueler, they were victims of downsizing, transferred, split up, ground down in distant wars until no one was left alive to hold the eagle standard. The 9th Legion wasn't swallowed by monsters or mist. They were swallowed by the bureaucracy of a dying empire. They drowned in paperwork, administrative decisions, and oblivion. A truly naked ending, right? But if you think a legion disappearing is the weirdest thing I've told you today, hold on to your seat. Because now, we are leaving old Europe to go to the New World, where a time-traveling object is challenging everything we know about human history. In archaeology, there are things called OOP arts, out-of-place artifacts. Usually they are trash, rocks looking like spaceships or cave drawings that conspiracy theorists claim are aliens. But this thing, the thing I'm about to put in here, it is a true nightmare. It is a thorn in the eye of every history book you ever studied in school. Let's turn back time to 1933. Location: Toluca Valley, Mexico. Archaeologist Jose Garcia Payon is digging at Calixtlahuaca. This is an ancient Aztec settlement located about 65 kilometers from Mexico City. Payon is a professional. He isn't looking for treasure. He is looking for knowledge. He records every layer of soil, every shard of pottery, every speck of dust. And then he found a grave. The important thing you need to remember is, this grave was undisturbed. It lay beneath 3 intact layers of plaster flooring, meaning no grave robbers sneaked in. No one had dug there since it was sealed around 1510 AD, right before the Spanish set foot to ravage this land. In that grave, lying amidst the burial goods of an Aztec noble, was this object. a terracotta head, small, just the size of your fist. But look closely at that face. What do you see? Deep-set eyes, a large, prominent, aquiline nose, and most importantly, a thick beard and mustache. This is where things get crazy. In pre-Columbian Mesoamerican art, meaning before Columbus found the Americas, indigenous men didn't grow beards. Their genetics resulted in very little facial hair, and their artistic conventions worshipped smooth, hairless faces. Look at Maya, Aztec, or Toltec statues. No one has a beard like this. This face does not belong to the Americas. It belongs to the Mediterranean. More specifically, it looks exactly, and I emphasize exactly, like a small statue in the Hellenistic Roman style. The kind of cheap art toy mass-produced in the 2nd century AD. Payan, our poor man, was completely confused. He did what any stuck scientist would do. He numbered it, recorded it in the ledger, then stored it in the warehouse, hoping someone smarter would explain it later. It took decades for art history experts to pull it out and confirm, aesthetically, stylistically, functionally, this is a Roman artifact. Here is the math problem making history professors lose sleep. Artifact has the style of the 2nd century AD, year 200. Discovery location, an Aztec grave from the 15th century, year 1476 to 1510. Context, buried underground before any European, according to official books, set foot in Mexico. If Payan didn't lie, and his field notes were extremely meticulous, then this Roman head was in an Aztec grave before Cortez and the Spanish Legion landed. How the hell did a Roman toy, made 1,300 years earlier, travel across the Atlantic and crawl into the grave of an Aztec chief? The implication of this is truly terrifying. If this is real, we have to rewrite human history. It means transoceanic contact happened more than a millennium before Columbus. Could a Roman ship carrying soldiers, maybe deserters from the 9th Legion we just talked about, have been blown off course by a storm, drifting aimlessly on the vast ocean, crossing the Atlantic and crashing onto the coast of Mexico? Did the crew survive, bringing their lucky charm ashore, only for that item to be worshipped by the natives, traded, and passed from hand to hand over centuries like a holy object? But wait, we are skeptics. We don't believe in fairy tales that easily. Could Payan have been tricked? Could some mischievous assistant have secretly slipped the head into the pit to prank the old man? Or is this a grand coincidence of the universe? An Aztec artist suddenly wanting to mold a stranger's face he saw in a dream? To solve this mystery, we can't rely on guesswork or naked eyes. We need heavy artillery. We need nuclear forensic science. In 1995, a group of German scientists decided, enough, let's fire this head up and see what it says. They used thermoluminescence dating, and the result they received? Oh, it made the entire archaeological world hold its breath. What was that result? And does it prove Rome went to America, or is it just a prank of time? (1995). The University of Heidelberg and Germany's prestigious Max Planck Institute. The most brilliant minds decided to put this tiny head on the operating table of quantum physics. The method they chose was thermoluminescence, TL. It sounds like the name of a weapon in a sci-fi movie, but its principle is simple and ruthless towards forgers. Fired clay is like a rechargeable battery. When fired in a kiln for the first time, it releases all its energy, returning to zero. Over time, it slowly absorbs radiation from the surrounding soil environment. By reheating the sample and measuring the light it spits out, scientists can know exactly when it last saw fire. The result? A straight punch to the face of skeptics. This head is about 1,800 years old. Its firing date range spans from the 9th century BC to the 13th century AD. But the highest probability, the sweet spot of the data, falls squarely into the Roman era, around 200 AD. What does this mean? First, it is not a Spanish doll from the colonial era, 16th century. Second, it is not a modern fake molded by some fraudster in 1930. This clay is ancient. So, we have a genuine Roman object sitting in a Mexican tomb sealed before Columbus was born. How? Eliminating theories about aliens or teleportation, science offers the scariest yet most logical explanation: the drift theory. Look at the North Equatorial Current. It's like a giant conveyor belt of nature running from the Canary Islands, sweeping across the Atlantic, and dumping straight into the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. Getty Images Com Fa, a Roman merchant ship, or perhaps a ship carrying deserters from the 9th Legion we talked about in the previous part. Blown off course by a storm, sails lost, drifting aimlessly. It would take months. The crew, dead from thirst, hunger, or gone mad under the scorching sun. But the ship, that hollow corpse, kept drifting, and its cargo did not know how to die. When it washed up on the shores of the New World, what would the natives finding at sea? Desiccated corpses in strange armor, and bizarre objects. A durable terracotta head, bearing the face of a strange god, would certainly be considered a powerful magical object, talisman. It was taken. It was worshipped. It was traded from the coast up to the Toluca Highlands through ancient trade networks. It was passed from father to son through 50 generations, like a sacred treasure, until in 1500 it was buried with an Aztec lord to protect him in the afterlife. Of course, there are other theories. Maybe the Vikings looted it from Europe and brought it to Vinland, and then it drifted south. Maybe. But whichever way, this Tacaxic head is a black swan. In science, a black swan is a rare, impossible event that changes everything. It is a singular data point that challenges the timeline we still trust. It sits there, in a small museum in Toluca, silent but arrogant. It tells us that oceans are not walls separating worlds. They are highways, and human history is much more porous, leaky, and mysterious than textbooks admit. The 9th Legion vanished into the void. The Roman head appeared from the void. Perhaps history is not a straight line. It is a circle full of holes. And our mission is to dare to look into those holes. Close your eyes. Imagine you are standing in the middle of a lush green forest in Sri Lanka. The atmosphere is peaceful, birds singing, wind blowing. And then, boom! Rising toweringly right in the middle of nowhere is a massive monolith. Its name is Sigiriya. People call it the 8th wonder of the world. But for me, I call it a tease of creation, or a defective product of some giant practicing cutting a birthday cake. Why do I say that? Look at it. 200 meters high, vertical, solitary, and its summit. It is flat to a freakish degree. It's as if someone took a giant heated knife, the size of a skyscraper, and, zap, sliced off the top of this rock, leaving a surface perfect enough to give you the creeps. Nature doesn't create straight lines like that, folks. Nature likes chaos, curves. But this thing looks designed. But the real madness isn't in the rock. It lies in what is on top of that rock. When we zoom the camera up to that 200-meter height, what strikes the eye isn't inanimate gravel. It is ruins, brick walls, foundations of a city or a fortress, or some hedonistic palace of the ancients. Archaeologists scratch their heads. They say these things are at least 1,500 years old. Okay, 1,500 years. An impressive number. But the number that kept me awake last night isn't the age, but the quantity of bricks. Statistically, there are at least 3 million bricks sitting smugly on top of this rock block. Stop for a moment and let your brain process this information. 3 million bricks. And on the summit of Sigiriya, clay, the raw material to fire bricks, is completely non-existent. Not a single grain. What does that mean? It means all 3 million of those bricks were molded down on the ground, then by some divine method, transported vertically up to a height of 200 meters. Have you ever tried carrying a bag of cement up to the 3rd floor via stairs? Out of breath, right? Now imagine you have to carry 3 million bricks up a vertical cliff as high as a 60-story building. And the fun part of the story lies here. There were no stairs. Don't let those spiral metal staircases you see in tourist photos fool you. That is a 20th century toy just installed, so tourists don't fall and break their necks. But turn back 15 centuries ago? Nothing. Completely smooth. Archaeologists found a few traces of ancient steps, but they are extremely limited, and certainly not a standard system for industrial-scale cargo transport. They don't lead to the top. So, how? How could ancient builders move that massive amount of material? Did they have wings? Did they use hot air balloons? Or did they form a human chain from the foot of the mountain to the peak and pass each brick hand to hand? Let's assume they had the manpower. But think about the logistics. A logistical nightmare that would make even modern-day Amazon or DHL weep. If using human power to haul bricks up a vertical cliff, you need ropes, pulleys, giant scaffolding, and more importantly, you need to feed that army of builders. On that barren rock top, there are no fruit trees, no rice paddies. Water and food also had to be brought up from below every day. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of workers crammed onto a windy, flat surface, building an insane structure under the scorching tropical sun. It is so absurd that even the locals living around there for centuries forgot its existence. Yes, you heard that right. A rock towering right there, yet it sank into oblivion until 1831, when a British guy named Jonathan Forbes, a major in the British Army, accidentally discovered it while hunting elephants or doing something similar. Before that, Sigiriya was like a ghost. It was there, towering, but no one dared mention it, or no one understood what the hell it was. If humans just walking, climbing through the steep forests surrounding the mountain base is already torture, then bringing 3 million bricks to the summit is physically impossible without assistive technology. But the story of the bricks is just a gentle warm-up. The absurdity starts to escalate when we look closer at other materials lying on top of this mountain. Not just fired bricks, there is also marble. Thousands of blocks of pure white marble lying scattered like the bones of giant beasts. And guess what? Geologists hammered the stone and shook their heads, confirming, this marble does not originate from this region. It doesn't naturally occur anywhere near Sigiriya. So, someone not only fired 3 million bricks, but also went to quarry marble in some distant place, dragged it to the foot of the mountain, and then continued the magic trick of levitating thousands of tons of stone up 200 meters without stairs. Clearly there is a massive piece missing in this historical puzzle. A piece about technology or construction methods that we, arrogant modern humans, still haven't decoded. Are we underestimating our ancestors? Or did some force, some hand not belonging to humanity, intervene here? Don't answer yet, because what I'm about to show you in the next part will make these 3 million bricks look like a kindergarten puzzle game. We will talk about water, about granite harder than steel, and cuts as smooth as ice cream. We talked about bricks, about marble. But if you think hauling materials up the mountain is the craziest thing, look at this. Right on the summit of this monolith, there is a massive freshwater tank. People call it a reservoir. But its size? 27 meters long, 20 meters wide, and about 2 meters deep. This isn't a bathtub, folks. It is an Olympic standard swimming pool for giants. And here is the key point. This pool wasn't built by piecing stone slabs together. Not at all. It is monolithic. What does that mean? It means our ancient engineers looked at the summit surface of solid granite, one of the hardest rocks on the planet, and decided, hey, let's dig a hole here. To create this pool, they had to remove, carve out, and discard about 3,500 tons of granite. Take a minute for your brain to digest that number. 3,500 tons of rock as hard as steel. If you gave me a bronze chisel and a hammer, the most advanced tools of that time, and told me to dig this pool, my great-great-grandchildren probably wouldn't have finished chipping one corner. Removing that mass of rock manually would take centuries, sweat, and the blood of tens of thousands of slaves. But let's assume they were very patient. Let's assume they had rock-breaking superpowers. What chills my spine isn't the amount of rock lost, but how it was taken away. When we stick the camera lens right up to the tank walls, to these bare granite cliffs, what do we expect? Jagged chisel marks? Cracks from heavy hammer impacts? Number. What we see are long, curving grooves, soft, smooth. They follow one another, layer upon layer. It doesn't look like someone was chiseling stone. It looks like someone was using a giant spoon to scoop ice cream out of a tub. How? How can you soften granite to scoop it up like mushy mud? Did the ancient builders possess a stone softening technology, or some kind of high-energy heat beam that could melt rock instantly? Sounds like sci-fi, right? But those ice cream scoop marks are staring us in the face, defying every explanation involving hammers and chisels. And the weirdness doesn't stop there. This pool, it seems to be alive. Sri Lanka is in the tropics. Summer here is hot as a kiln. But the water level in the pool never depletes, despite the scorching drought year-round. And conversely, during the monsoon season, when rain pours down like waterfalls, this pool never overflows, causing flooding. Absolutely not. The water level is always kept at a perfect level. And do you know what the scariest part is? No pipes. No one found pipes leading water in. No one found drains leading water out. No pumps, no valves. Yet it self-balances magically. Modern scientists try to explain it with big words like reverse osmosis, dew condensation, or slow underground drainage systems. But those are just hypotheses. The reality is, this 1,500-year-old hydraulic system is operating more smoothly than the drainage systems of modern cities today. The locals have another name for this pool. They call it Ravana's Pool. Ravana, the great king in Sri Lankan legend. But wait, in ancient texts, Ravana isn't described as a normal human. He is said to belong to a race called Asura. And Asura, in many ancient translations, are not earthlings. They are those who came from the stars. Could it be that Ravana, or this Asura race, were the owners of those giant rock scoops? We aren't done yet. If you think this pool is the peak of absurdity, wait until I show you the scars on the rock face of the mountainside. Cuts that even today's laser technology would sweat to replicate. Prepare yourself, because the next part will overturn everything you ever knew about the concept of primitive man. If you think the pool on the summit is the craziest thing, welcome to a civil engineer's nightmare. I am hanging at this deadly height to show you something Google Earth can never zoom into. Look at this rock face. These aren't natural cracks from earthquakes or erosion. No, these are scars, artificial scars. Scattered across this vertical mountainside are sharp rectangular cuts, deep gouges, and strange boreholes. Archaeologists nod and confirm, yeah, that's right, ancient humans did that. But they forgot to explain one basic thing to me. Where did people stand to chisel these holes? Look around me. Not a single rock ledge to place a foot. No trace of scaffolding holes. Beneath my feet is the abyss. Above my head is a slippery cliff. How could a craftsman holding a hammer and chisel cling to this greased pig of a cliff, swinging a hammer against the world's hardest granite thousands of times without falling and shattering their bones? Unless Sri Lankan ancestors were Spider-Man or they knew how to fly, gravity here has been turned off by someone. And this is what gives me goosebumps. Look at these grooves. At first glance, they look like steps, but look closely at their angle. They are 90 degrees perpendicular to the ground, or sometimes upside down. A staircase leading where? Leading sideways across the cliff? Humans don't walk like that. Geckos walk like that. These steps are completely useless for the movement of normal humans. So, what is their purpose? Analyzing the rock surface closer, confusion turns to vague fear. We see horizontal cuts, deep and perfectly even. Some people try to gloss over it, saying these are water channels. Wrong. Water channels must have a slope for water to flow down. As for these grooves, they are perfectly horizontal, water level. Water would just stagnate and rot there. Furthermore, look at the surface texture inside the cut. It's that thing again. Those ice cream scoop marks we saw at the pool on the summit. The granite here wasn't smashed. It was shaved off. There are cubic blocks gouged deep into the mountain body smoothly, leaving a slick surface. You can't do that with iron chisels. If you use a chisel, the rock will shatter, leaving a rough, granular surface. But this? It looks like someone ran a thermonuclear blade lightly through a block of butter. The question is, why? Why climb up a vertical cliff, where even birds get tired wings, to carve these bizarre, useless shapes that no one sees? Unless these cuts aren't for decoration, and they weren't created by climbing humans. The craziest but most logical hypothesis right now. Could these be traces of machines? Imagine a giant machine or some flying device anchored hovering by the mountainside. Those 90-degree steps could be locking mechanisms, anchor points for a high-tech device we can't imagine. Or are those horizontal grooves rails for an elevator transporting the 3 million bricks we questioned in Part 1? If Sigiriya was truly built using rock-scooping technology and anti-gravity flying devices, its owners certainly weren't barefoot, bleary-eyed farmers of the past. We are facing a site that does not belong to mainstream history, and the name Asura I mentioned earlier perhaps isn't just a legend. Was Ravana truly an alien king? And was Sigiriya an airport, a transit station, or a fortress of guests from the stars? The final answer, and the darkest veil of secrecy, will be lifted in the conclusion. Don't take your eyes off the screen. So we have taken a tour around Sri Lanka's most magnificent crime scene. And now it is time to face the final question. A question that mainstream archaeology often dodges or tries to gloss over with hollow explanations about the power of religious faith or the diligence of slaves. What do we have here? 1. 3 million bricks transported to a height of 200 meters without stairs. 2. Thousands of marble blocks imported from a strange place. 3. A giant pool scooped into steel-hard granite using mysterious ice cream scooping techniques. Self-balancing water without pipes. 4. Laser cuts and technical grooves on a vertical cliff where humans cannot stand. If you tell me all of this was done by loincloth-wearing farmers holding stone hammers and bronze chisels, singing folk songs while working, then sorry. You are insulting your own intelligence. The disparity between primitive tools and the monumental result here is too vast. It is like trying to build the ISS space station using Scotch tape and cardboard. So if not normal humans, then who? Local legends don't lie. They don't call this the palace of a mortal king. They call it the work of Ravana. And remember what I said. Ravana belonged to the Asura race. In Sanskrit and ancient texts, Asura isn't simply demon. They are powerful entities, possessing flying machines called vimanas, and holding knowledge far beyond the understanding of humanity at that time. Could Asura be the way ancient people called guests from beyond Earth? If this hypothesis is true, then Sigiriya is not a fortress. It could be an observation tower, a power station, or a landing pad for those legendary vimanas. The strange grooves on the mountainside aren't for decoration, but docking mechanisms for ancient spaceships. We, arrogant modern humans with iPhones and AI, always think we are the pinnacle of civilization. But standing before this rock, I feel we are like children rummaging through the ashes of a superior civilization that has vanished. History is not a straight line upwards. Perhaps it is a circle. And Sigiriya is a towering reminder, a cold slap to our arrogance that you know nothing. And you? What do you believe? Is it the muscle power of tens of thousands of slaves conquering gravity? Or is it the lost technology of the Asura race from the stars? Don't just sit there and nod. Go down to the comments section and tell me your craziest hypothesis. I will read them all, because sometimes the truth lies in the craziest ideas. If this video makes you lose sleep tonight, then my mission is accomplished. Don't forget to hit like, share for friends who are also seeking the truth, and subscribe to the channel Dark History, so we can continue exposing the dark secrets of this world. I am Zorro, and remember, darkness always holds more truth than light. Goodbye, and see you in the next nightmare.